This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our weekly Reporter Roundtable. Among this week's headlines, JEA's former CEO says he doesn't deserve prison time for his corruption conviction. A developer proposes what could be Jacksonville's new tallest building. 5 Points faces more changes with the announced closing of a beloved pie shop. And some Duval County school students are left stranded after bus routes contract. We'll talk about all of that and the mayor's plan to address homelessness ahead in our Friday Week in Review. Then, the Dead Walk Among Us ahead of the 29th annual Grateful Dead celebration, known as China Cat Sunflower Festival. We're taking your calls at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And you can watch our live stream on Facebook or YouTube. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Biden and Vice President Harris held separate meetings yesterday at the White House with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. After Harris finished her meeting, she made remarks. Harris reiterated she strongly supports security for the state of Israel, including defending it against Iran. But she also said she has strong concerns about the war in Gaza.
I also expressed with the Prime Minister my serious concern about the scale of human suffering in Gaza, including the death of far too many innocent civilians. And I made clear my serious concern about the dire humanitarian situation there.
The Israeli Prime Minister goes to Florida today, where he will meet former President Donald Trump. The 2024 Summer Olympic Games officially begin today with an open-air parade along the Seine River through Paris. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley reports security is high for an event that many analysts deem to be risky.
To secure the Seine River before tonight's parade of athletes and performers, an enclosed perimeter was constructed on both banks, extending into neighboring areas. Only those with special police-issued passes can enter. Over 50,000 police officers and soldiers are deployed in Paris, manning sniper positions and patrolling the river and surrounding streets. Paris airspace is shut down in a 90-mile radius, and the army is carrying out anti-drone operations. The Paris Beltway has also been closed to prevent unauthorized vehicles from entering the French capital. But the massive security measures did not stop an overnight attack on France's high-speed rail system that the Prime Minister called coordinated and well-planned. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Paris.
The Prime Minister also said the attack was carried out on the nerve centers of France's high-speed rail system, which show a good knowledge of the system and where to strike. He said the investigation is ongoing and everyone must be prudent. One of Mexico's most notorious drug lords has been arrested by U.S. authorities. NPR's Ada Peralta reports Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who is second only to El Chapo Guzman, was arrested along with one of El Chapo's sons.
Ismael El Mayo Zambada founded the powerful Sinaloa cartel along with El Chapo Guzman, but Zambada has always eluded capture. American courts have charged Zambada with drug trafficking-related crimes many times over the years, beginning in 2003. He's accused of shipping tons of drugs to the United States and spending millions bribing many high-level Mexican officials. For years, it was rumored that Zambada was in poor health, but authorities still believed he was in charge of one of the most important factions of the Sinaloa cartel, which is one of the major exporters of fentanyl. This is a major blow to the cartel. El Chapo Guzman is serving life in prison in the U.S., and now his top ally and two of his sons are in custody. Ada Peralta, NPR News, Mexico City.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington. Wildfires continue to grow in the West. The Park Fire in Northern California has burned more than 250 square miles. The largest active wildfire burning in the U.S. is the Durkee Fire in eastern Oregon. That has scorched more than 400 square miles. The 14th year of Plastic-Free July is drawing to a close. It's a global challenge to cut out single-use plastics. As NPR's Claire Murashima reports, the movement came about after an Australian government worker toured a recycling plant and saw the amount of plastic that her town threw out.
After seeing where her recycling went, Rebecca Prince Ruiz challenged her coworkers to cut out single-use plastics for 1 month in 2011.
I think we've come a long way. We still have so far to go.
Last year, Prince Ruiz estimates 89 million people worldwide took the challenge. And though many may have only done it for a day or a week, they kept over 500 million pounds of household single-use plastics out of landfills. She recommends buying in bulk, carrying around food containers, and taking the challenge with friends. The foundation behind Plastic Free July also lobbies for policy change to make plastic-free living cheaper and easier, since plastic-free alternatives are often more expensive. Claire Murashima, NPR News.
New York State Governor Kathy Hochul is facing 2 new lawsuits. Climate advocates don't like her decision to block the start of a new fee that drivers were supposed to pay to go into New York City. It's intended to cut vehicle traffic into the city. Hochul says the $15 fee to drive into New York would create hardships for middle-class families. I'm Corva Coleman, NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Eric and Wendy Schmidt through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working toward a healthy, resilient, secure world for all. On the web at theschmidt.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, JEA's former CEO says prison time isn't necessary in his case. A Skyrise developer proposes taking downtown to new heights. A beloved pie shop is the latest casualty of a changing 5 points. Some students are being left behind as Duval County school bus services contract, and the city unveils a new plan to address homelessness to comply with state law. To talk about all of that, I am joined by a panel of excellent journalists. Jasmine Monroe, anchor and reporter at First Coast News.
Hi.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jasmine.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Ann, everybody.
Trisha Booker, author, former reporter, and currently a journalism professor at University of North Florida. Hi, Trisha.
Hi, Ann.
And Rich Donnelly, also a weekend reporter and anchor and reporter at First Coast News. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Ann. Nice to see you again.
Good to have you back. So, a judge next week is going to decide whether a man convicted in what's described as the largest fraud in city history serves prison time. Aaron Zahn is going to be sentenced in federal court next Tuesday after a jury found him guilty of conspiracy and fraud. And David Bauerlein is one of a handful of reporters who has covered this from the very beginning. David, it's been about 5 years, more than 5 years, since the city tried to start selling JEA.
It's a big block of time when you look at it that way. It really has, because this all started in the summer of 2019. And now we're finally at the finality of this arc with Aaron Zahn facing sentencing on Tuesday.
What do we know about what's going to happen on Tuesday?
So the judge will decide. It has a lot of discretion. We know that the probation office did a pre-sentencing report and said that it could be up to 9 years based on their review of the case. The defense attorneys and Aaron Zahn are saying, essentially, as you pointed out, well, he suffered enough. Just the prosecution, the conviction is enough to punish and deter him from any other future acts. And so they're asking for simply probation, no prison sentence. And then the third voice in the room will be the prosecutor, Tyson Duva, who sort of has not said what the exact sentencing range would be that he'll recommend, but seems to indicate it would be somewhere between probation and the 9-year mark.
And so each side is required to file what's known as a sentencing memorandum, where they kind of lay out their argument for why someone should receive punishment, or in Aaron Zahn's case, why he says he should not. And it's interesting what's in the documents. The Zahn's attorneys are saying that this criminal case they say, is more akin to a flawed business idea, which is an interesting statement, given the fact that a jury did find him guilty of conspiracy.
multiple references to Aaron Zahn's ethics and morals in this document. Um, and his claim about the damage already done to him personally. Talk a little bit about how those elements fit into that sentencing memorandum.
They're definitely not giving an inch on the uh, sort of being, I think, defiant even about that he was not guilty of what he was convicted of, and so usually you look for some sort of remorse. You're not going to find that in the document. It really does still make the argument that this was, yeah, just a bad business idea, and it was not criminal intent. It was not attempting to steal money from the taxpayers of Jacksonville. So that's part of the sort of argument that Aaron Zahn makes. He also makes the argument that sort of this fall from grace argument that simply being prosecuted and convicted has basically ruined his life from the career professional standpoint, that he's never going to be able to get a job in finance or for another utility, and that this is going to stick with him for the rest of his life. And then, and the third argument is one that I think a lot of defendants would make in this case, which is, I have 3 young children, a wife. This really is going to cause collateral damage on them. Obviously, every defendant can make that argument as well, and they're going to try and make the argument that it's uniquely so in his case. So that's kind of where Aaron Zahn is coming from. It's a mix of, you know, still don't feel like I was convicted of something, that I'd committed a crime, and just virtue of the fact that I've been convicted is more than enough punishment for me.
Do you think we'll hear him speak at the sentencing hearing?
It could be possible. Yeah, I guess that could be possible. I would not be surprised. I think that he might feel like he's his own best advocate. And and that could be very possible to hear straight from him, and his thoughts, and I'm sure, especially on the family part of it, might be something he really can talk about from the heart. That would be more moving from him than it would be from the defense attorney making a case on his behalf.
We're talking about the week's big headlines with our panel of journalists, and you are welcome to call in or send us an email if you want to join the program. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So, Rich, this particular document that he filed, he calls the relentless local media coverage essentially something that he views as extrajudicial punishment, and he says it's responsible for a diagnosis of PTSD. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
I mean, I can say as someone who sat on a public sidewalk waiting for Mr. Zahn to appear in court that we were there. We were relentless. I guess more than just the royal we in this sense. Some of our video, in fact, came from you, Ann, when you worked at First Coast News as well, like waiting to see him come in. The issue with the relentlessness, although I take offense to that to a degree, it's not like, at least our station, I can't speak for anyone else, we weren't camped out at his home, his private residence. We were waiting for when he appeared in a public place going into court. The federal court, we're not allowed to bring cameras in, so our only opportunity to get video, and that's the medium in which First Coast News is, a television station, is that walk from a car to the courtroom. And then once he gets to the courthouse doors, our cameras can't go in, so they stop. We use a sketch artist for anything inside the courtroom. So for the 25 seconds of him walking, I question how much could truly trigger horrible pains. It's a public place. It's a public sidewalk. He is the defendant in the largest corruption case in Jacksonville's history. And, he can choose to answer questions or not. And then, so I would say from a journalistic respectful distance, we stayed in our 20 feet of realm in that sense.
It's very indicative to me of somebody who has been accused and convicted of a white-collar crime. I mean, it's the, well, I didn't kill anybody kind of defense. In the memo, he described, the lawyer said the prosecution and conviction have wreaked substantial havoc on Aaron's personal life. And I read that and I thought, yeah, I mean, when you commit a crime like this, it's going to wreak havoc on your life. that seemed to me to be something that would be more appropriate for an appeal, maybe. But to the way he put himself out there is kind of a martyr. Woe is me because of what you think I've done. And woe is me because the media covered it. It just, it
It's
was
sort of like the idea, I apologize if I offended you.
Right.
Mhm.
Like,
I think a lot of people make that mistake though. The media, it's we are friendly to a fault, right? We cover the Jags, we cover different things. It's a fair and balanced newscast. But if you find yourself in the middle of the spotlight committing a crime, we have to cover it. That's the job of a journalist. We're not here to be your PR agent. We're not here to make you look good. We're here to tell the facts, and the facts are you are going inside of the courtroom that day, and we have to cover it.
David, I was just going to say that a lot of the filing is an argument about what constitutes loss. And this is a pretty technical legal argument. It's based on some recent changes in interpretation at the 11th Circuit level, the appellate level in the Florida, district, essentially, particularly in the Northern Florida district. But the argument that they're making is that because there was not an actual loss, this plan was foiled, it didn't happen, that it should not be that the metric that they used for punishment shouldn't include this $40 million potential loss that JEA would have suffered or that he would have benefited from, and instead should look at what actually happened, which was there was no loss. So that's something for a judge to decide, but it's an interesting argument, certainly, and it's kind of what they made during the case was, no harm, no foul, right? Nothing happened.
Right. I think that is when the probation report, the pre-sentencing report is done. That's one of the things that really can ratchet up what the maximum prison term is. What is the loss? And so you do get into all of that with the defense saying no, there was no loss, and so that is where the judge would come in, and even the prosecution will take a look at that pre-sentencing report, and they'll make their own evaluation. I think in terms of what they think is an appropriate sentence. I mean, technically, there was no loss because the plan didn't go through, but there was that was obviously, there would have been a huge financial windfall. That's, I think, probably undisputed for Aaron Zahn if the JEA had been sold.
Would that be, and I don't know the answer to this, but how would that equate to an attempted bank robbery, for example, when it didn't actually go through? Would it be the same? It's the same philosophy. Why would that be different?
Or if you're thwarted in any kind of crime,
Yeah.
right?
Right. The same argument, which is, that just because you did not succeed does not mean you had intent to violate the law to rip off the taxpayers of Jacksonville. That's what the case is about. He was trying to steal money that the city taxpayers really deserve because they own that utility, and he was trying to skim off money for himself to enrich himself personally.
How sensitive do you think Judge Brian Davis is going to be to the public perception of this case? This is not just an average white collar criminal case, and not just because of the amount, but because of the nature of the utility, the fact that it's owned by this city, owned by ratepayers, and a lot of people, work at that utility that stood to lose their jobs.
I would think, and we'll see what he says on Tuesday, but I would think a judge would be sensitive to the idea that giving probation in this case after such a high-profile prosecution with so much at stake, that he would be sensitive to the argument that the prosecution's going to make, which is probation would essentially be sending a bad message to others who might want to use their positions of public trust to violate that and try to make money off it, because that would be kind of saying, well, yes, we've convicted you of all these of fraud, of conspiracy, but that's fine. Just convicting you is enough. I think that's probably something that a judge would look at and say, what's the deterrent effect of having an actual prison time for this magnitude of the crime that was committed here?
Based on that, Rich, you think that there would be at least some prison time in this case as opposed to strictly a probationary sentence?
I would imagine, especially given the fact that he could have faced up to 25 years initially based on a lot of the reporting. The fact that, a new document says recommended, up to 9 years. 9 is not close to 25, and certainly probation is not close to 25. And to David's point about being a deterrent for future actors in this case, if you're going to get hey, please don't try and do this again, what kind of deterrent does that sent.
You know, it's interesting too that they're not asking that this count necessarily towards his punishment, but in addition to the $40 million that they say he stood to gain if this fraudulent retirement stock benefit plan went through after a sale of JEA or during a sale of JEA, they've looked at what it cost JEA because of downgraded, you know, bonds or their value, the expense that they've incurred defending Aaron Zahn himself because of their insurance policy, the money that they've expended in other ways, you know, accounting, lawyers, things that they had to buy or do. And that was a substantial amount. I think it was like another 40, $50 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the amount of consultants I thought was somewhere in the range of $11 million. I mean, whether they would have spent that money regardless, because there was, separate and apart from the scheme that Aaron Zahn cooked up, there was an interest in potentially selling JEA. What cooked that effort was Aaron Zahn in this bonus scheme, and once that was exposed, that sunk it.
We have a message from Brandon on Facebook. He says the failure to properly punish white collar crime is a big reason that corporate corruption is just an assumed part of society. There is a perception, I think, that it isn't equitable, Jasmine, that there is this stark difference between, you know, how white collar criminals are punished, even though their impact can be much greater in terms of on a societal level. Certainly, this would have impacted the entire city and its budget forever, really.
I think mainly a lot of people think of it as like a simple slap on the wrist. And if you do get another opportunity, there's no telling that you can go to another city and you can be the next CEO at the next utility company. So to make an example out of him, so in other white collar crimes too as well, you do have to go full force and handle it as such, just like it's any other blue collar crime.
I want to shift gears now and talk about a new proposal for a new tallest building in Jacksonville. And if you want to join our conversation, you can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can reach out on social media. Rich, so let's talk about this. This would be the tallest building in the Southeast from Miami to Atlanta. Where would it be located? What would it look like? Tell us about this. You covered that this week.
Okay, so the Downtown Investment Authority had a workshop earlier this week, and they were talking about 3 distinct parcels of land along the north bank of the St. Johns River in downtown. The eastern half of Riverfront Plaza, next to the Main Street Bridge, directly across the other side of the bridge, the parking lot in between the Main Street Bridge and the Hyatt, and then also the sort of the where the former courthouse used to be on Bay Street, Ford on Bay, where, you know, River Jams has been in previous years. So those 3 parcels of land, and the idea from the Downtown Investment Authority was that these 3 specific plots could generate tons of revenue for the city, be a driving force behind the continued redevelopment of downtown. And one group that was at this meeting, people from Cross Regions Development, and they would like the plot that's east of the Main Street Bridge in between the Hyatt, and they want to build a building with 35,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space and 320 condos, and it would be Jacksonville's tallest building and the tallest building between Atlanta and Miami, and quite frankly, I think it looks like a sword in sort of a cool way. But, you know, I'm not sure how this is going to progress, because yes, it's a bold plan, but we've seen a lot of development downtown not quite get off the ground in this stretch. And these are the earliest renderings possible. We would be years away from this. We're at the proposal side of the investment group. Not even, you know, they're not in front of city council. This is not coming tomorrow. Like,
right.
Shovel's not meeting dirt tomorrow. We're years away, but it's intriguing. And I asked Doug Smith, who's the COO of Cross Regions, is this sort of the chicken or the egg scenario? Do you need major development to draw other restaurants, entertainment, business, reasons for people to live downtown? You'd need 320 families to fill these condos if the building was to be full. That's a lot of people.
I want to take a call from Paul in downtown. Good morning, Paul. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Whether you look at this as just another rendering or not, the one thing that's positive is that it is the first condo that's being proposed on the south or north bank. Everything else that's being proposed is or about to be accepted is apartments, and that doesn't give anybody the right to own something on the riverbank, which if there was something that I could buy on the riverbank, I would purchase one. But I'm not going to live in an apartment paying somebody else's rent.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that comment. In terms of what this would cost, do we know what they're asking for, David? I mean, this is a parcel of land that's owned by the city. It's not quite 2 acres of land. A lot of times when someone comes in and says, hey, city, I'm going to develop this for you, the trade-off there is, but I also want the land for no cost, or I want tax rebates down the road, or I want incentives of some other kind.
Well, we don't know what they're not even at that stage yet in terms of actually negotiating incentives. They clearly would have a lot of incentives to do a project like this. And their part of the cost would be to tear down a little off-ramp that goes through the property from the Main Street Bridge. That's about $5 million. If they were to move this big sewer pipeline that runs along the riverfront to create some more space for this big condo tower, that would be, I think, early estimates like $10 million. So just the public costs would be pretty substantial.
Just to prepare the site.
Right. And then they probably have some property tax rebates, and you would guess they'd go to the usual menu. They did say they don't want a completion grant, which is this new kind of tool where, if you get an A on your report card, you get a lot of money.
Or if you did what you said you were going to do, you get a reward. Yeah.
So they evidently are not asking for one of those big, huge completion grants. Yeah, it is interesting to the caller's point. I mean, the only place you can actually buy something downtown is a home. There's some townhomes in the LaVille area, and they seem to be selling okay. But if you're going to do a condo tower, that's the real test of the Jacksonville downtown market. Are enough people going to say, yeah, I'll pre-lease it to make it feel like you can build this building without it being empty?
We've got a call. I'm sorry, just going to take Mark from the west side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. I call about these things every time. It's maddening to me that these private companies come into our city, usually from elsewhere, and say, we're going to build you this big, new, shiny thing, and we want you to help us pay for it. If this were Alaska somewhere, I'd say go for it. But, every couple of weeks we hear that Jacksonville is in the top 5 city of people moving to, or the top 5 growth, St. Johns County, Duval County. We don't need this. What I would like to see a city council or the Downtown Development Authority or somebody say no once in a while. I don't think Mayor Delaney, you should get him on the phone. Mayor Delaney, when he started all this, said this was strictly prime the pump. It's not meant to be a forever thing. And, we've had it for 25, 30 years now, and it seems more entrenched than less. I mean, if this is such a good idea, let them pay for it. And does that hold any sway with anybody that, hey, our building is 10 feet taller than the next tallest building in Miami? I mean, that's ridiculous. That sounds like something from the 20s.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about that, Jasmine. I mean, how much does bragging rights for the tallest building matter, whether it's in downtown Jacksonville or biggest in the Southeast?
I mean, the comparison, it's a good punchline. Everyone loves a good headline. Everyone knows that that's clickbait, just a building taller than Miami to Atlanta. That's pretty incredible. I say it all the time, no matter what, if you build it, they will come. Jacksonville is such a beautiful city. I moved here from Cleveland, Ohio. I've watched Cleveland, Ohio continue to grow and prosper because they started building things downtown. They started opening restaurants, apartment complexes. Families started moving, not just single, young entrepreneurs. It was families that were moving back downtown. And honestly, I mean, you have to take a chance eventually.
Rich, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say to David's point about the JEA sewer line, that's not an easy thing to do, and it's a necessary one. It was described as a high-flow sanitary sewer line that is next to the river, and so it can't go into the river, and that's something that there's potential pollution issues that need to be considered, there's the one on San Jose that cracked and caused issues. You can't have that flow into the river. And then Cross Regions, I believe, is local or has a local connection. They did some development in St. Johns County, and I think they were saying in Amelia Island as well. So it's not necessarily carpetbagging prospectors coming down just asking for a handout. I do believe they have considerable ties to our area. And to Jasmine's point, clickbaity, yeah, to a degree. This story's been the top performing story on our website since it was posted 2 days ago.
Interesting.
So people have taken notice.
Tricia, nobody is lining up to offer you riverfront property with tax rebates for the next 30 years.
Not that I know of.
You haven't heard. But the idea is that this is supposed to catalyze growth. And I think for a lot of the city, there have been, as we speak often of, these renderings, these promises that are made of something or another that is going to actually kickstart a serious growth spurt.
Yeah, this feels like downtown development redux. I mean, we're talking about this every few months, it seems like, and there's not a cohesive plan that people can grab onto. And I think when you have something like this proposed, it's hard for people to imagine how it's going to change the nature of our skyline, how to change the nature, how is it going to affect downtown, and it's going to be so long in the future. Although I did notice that a few years ago, China built a 54-story building in 19 days using modular pieces, but I don't think that that's what they're planning
That's
here.
not a plan.
That's not a plan. But 3-5 years down the line, people, it's hard for them to imagine, well, where's downtown going to be at that point? Is this building going to be able to flow with whatever downtown development plan we have in place at that point?
Right. We've got a call from Matthew in San Marco. Good morning, Matthew.
I love San Marco.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead.
I just want to say I'm 29 years old. I'm a young professional. I live in San Marco, and I am excited to just see development in downtown. I know there's been a lot of questions about, where the city is investing money lately. But I mean, I think developing downtown should be, one of the forefronts of the conversation here. Because I mean, as of now, there's not much there. There's nothing drawing anyone downtown. And I know there was a big question about the chicken and the egg here. I mean, are they going to be able to fill 340 condos without much else around the area? But I mean, I think you also mentioned there's 35,000 square feet of retail and entertainment space in this building. That in and of itself will be a draw. And as you also mentioned, this is going to be a really long process. I mean, there's years of planning and development and approvals and permitting and then construction. And I mean, that puts everyone else on notice. Maybe this is it. This is go time. Let's start developing around this area. So I think this is a step in the right direction, and I think it will usher in probably a significant amount of development in that area.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate your thoughts. We also have a question from Anita on Facebook. She says, any estimate on the net loss in millions of dollars to Jacksonville so far on failed subsidized projects? Oh, wow. Remembering shipyards and others. David, you're, the most veteran business reporter in this city. Has anybody tried to calculate lost millions of dollars on failed subsidized projects?
No, I haven't. That would be an interesting research project to take a look at that. I mean, a lot of these projects, it's, someone comes in with a big proposal. There's incentives that are offered. The real risk is if you provide incentives up front and then the project goes belly up.
Which has happened.
Which has happened sometimes.
The shipyards is instructive, right?
Right, exactly. That was one, and that was many years ago. I mean, so that's a risk. I mean, if you go and tear down the Main Street off-ramp and you relocate the sewer, and then it turns out, well, after all, that's not going to work, and there's no other developer that wants to do something there, you spent a lot of money up front for something that didn't pan out at the end.
We've got a call from Allison. Good morning, Allison. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina now. I grew up in Jacksonville in the 90s, and I've seen these come and go, and it's so frustrating to kind of listen in. I'm happy to do it. I love listening to your station, but to kind of hear this conversation just happening over and over again, just like I used to hear it when I was younger. And, a tall building isn't why people want to live in a city. It's just so frustrating. Good jobs and good schools and housing that can support people, infrastructure. That's what draws people. Really, mainly, I think schools and education and available jobs. Who's going to want to live downtown just because there's a tall building there?
It's a great
It's been
comment.
this conversation for 30 years.
Yeah, it's a great comment, Allison, and it is coming, of course, at a time when we're struggling to find housing for people who are unhoused, when the schools districts considering very seriously closing a number of schools, Trisha,
Telling kids to walk to school.
Sure. And we're going to be talking about that as well. Yeah. But, it's, I think the optics of that are difficult, as Allison says, for some people to swallow.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think her point is very well taken. People aren't going to say, "Oh, wow, there's a huge building in Jacksonville. Let's go live there." Affordable housing is also an enormous question in Jacksonville, particularly in the core area. And I haven't heard any of these condos referred to as being available for lower income people.
Although because it is condos, not apartments, all of a sudden that's property taxable base. You'd have a higher property tax on 320 different personal residences as opposed to one apartment building. I'd be interested to see the finances behind that, what the long-term gain for the city in terms of property
if they're
taxes would be.
occupied.
How does
If
that
they're occupied,
how does that shake out tax-wise if the property owner is given tax rebates? Do the condo owners still pay property taxes, or does that get all subsumed in the tax breaks that were given the developer?
Oh, that's a really good question, Ann. Now when I think about it, I would assume that would probably not be a real easy tool to use because it would be difficult probably to do property tax rebates back to individual condo owners. Maybe there's some shared space that has a property tax that they all pay together, and maybe that where some rebates could go. I know it'd be very different type of tools may be used when you have a condo tower as opposed to an apartment tower.
I just want to say that Tom asked on Facebook, is it smart building the tallest building in the region right on the river in an area already subject to hurricanes? And certainly that's a important question and something to be thinking about. But I want to move on. We are talking to Trisha Booker, Rich Donnelly, David Bauerlein, Jasmine Monroe, four great reporters about the headlines that are dominating the news this week. 5 points I want to move on to. If you're interested in joining the conversation about what's happening in 5 points, you can reach us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So we learned this week that Mixed Fillings Pie Shop, which is a staple of the 5 Points community and really just a kind of beloved outfit, is going to be closing, is being evicted. Apparently, Jasmine, what do we know about why they're leaving and how that comes just on the heels of another big closure?
So I've been working on this story for quite some time, I could say. And speaking with Natasha Burton, it's definitely something that she said is heartbreaking.
The owner?
The owner. She's the owner of Mixed Fillings Pie Shop right in 5 Points area. Speaking to her husband, too, as well. She actually was one of our Living Legacy recipients in a series that we did in February for Black businesses in the area. She had a lot of things that she put on the table, and it was complaints when it came to the landlord and the response time to the landlord. But still, this story is an ongoing story that we, of course, are working on. There are things, there are sides, there are lease agreements, there are complaints that had happened during the time. And I think it's up in the air to actually figure out exactly what's happening. The area is such a booming area, and it's unfortunate to see a business go.
Trisha, you've been reporting on 5 Points for, since the 90s.
I recently dug up this story that I wrote in 1996, and I referred to 5 Points as the place where a person can get pierced, dressed up, dressed down, informed, fed, tattooed, shorn, drunk, outfitted with prescription glasses. And it still is that place. And I think that it is unfortunate that both the Sunray Cinema and the Pie Shop are having disagreements with landlords. But at the end of the day, 5 Points has been changing forever, and it kind of stays the same. And the people who I've spoken with who are very invested in 5 Points, it's kind of a shoulder shrug. I think it's very sad for the business owner and sad for people who patronize the shop. But it also is just kind of the nature of an area like that. Businesses are coming and going. And I think that people feel like as long as we don't have, urban outfitters moving into there. It's most of Five Points is comprised of small, locally owned shops and still has a kind of a funky, cool feel.
I was looking back with my producers at other business closures that have occurred in Five Points, and I hadn't really thought about it holistically. But Southern Roots Filling Station closed, very popular food and coffee place in 2022. Costa's Pizza closed after 41 years in 2021. Black Sheep closed in May 2023, and then of course Sunray, which is a big loss for a lot of people because it was a destination. Rich, the theater there, it was really part of the heart and soul of that community.
It was also sort of as people came out of the pandemic, it was an interesting way to come back to in theater movies as well, because you had the vibe, you had the atmosphere. It wasn't the 20 different movie plexes that everywhere in the suburbs can go. It was unique. It was old world, but it was hip. It was new with old all at the same time, wrapped up. And some of the movies that they would play were interesting. It was not necessarily playing the hits. It was an event in of itself to be in the theater and then to also go to the movie.
And delicious popcorn.
There you go.
Rocky Horror.
Yeah, right. We got an email from Danae. She says maybe the city council could help Sunray Cinema find a downtown location and then work on Trader Joe's. These are both major draws. I don't know that either of those are in the works, but I mean, how much does the city help smaller businesses, David, compared to these large projects with the beautiful renderings and the big asks?
Well, there are in downtown, they do have some special programs for small businesses that will help them go in and renovate a building, take care of some of the upfront costs. They don't pay their lease, but they obviously have some programs that have seeded some of these small businesses. And the ones that have started downtown seem to have gone pretty well. Once you get outside downtown, that's not the case anymore. They do have to draw a line in terms of where, because to Trisha's point, I mean, 5 Points there's been a lot of churn. There's always going to be a lot of churn. It still kind of does have that funky vibe to it. A lot of things we've been talking about downtown, that is happened at 5 Points. People walk from the neighborhoods. It's a pedestrian friendly area. And that's the kind of vibe that really they'd love to see happen more in downtown itself.
I think the question that actually the business owner, Natasha Burton, had to ask for the landlord is these businesses that come in and out, what is it that they're complaining about when they're leaving? Is it the same thing? Is it the same complaints that each business owner are having? Except for Sunray Cinema, they do have similar topics.
And rising rents.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, talking about walking places, school bus limits have changed in Duval County. And for people who live less than 2 miles from a middle or high school, they're going to have to hoof it now, Tricia. This is a big change for students right ahead of the start of school.
Yeah, and I don't think this would be as big a deal in lots of different places, but Jacksonville has been well known as one of the least pedestrian-friendly cities in the country, and it's unfortunate. I mean, if we had more dedicated sidewalks, if we had more places where children could safely ride their bikes to school, I don't think this would be as big an issue as it is. But yeah, we got to get kids to school, and if you're living in a place where it's not safe for your kid to walk or ride a bike to school, I think the buses have to pick them up.
I was going to say, even talking about carpooling, they're telling these families who don't even have a car. Some of these families don't even own a car. Some these families' parents work 3 to 4 jobs to tell them you can use this rideshare program that puts you on public transit. Just to go back to a place, I worked on a story very closely in Cleveland. Aliana DeFries, if you look up this name, this young woman was walking to school because this just little girl, her parents had to go to work, and she took the public transit to bus and she was murdered. And they were looking for her for days and they couldn't find her. So it's things like that. You have little young women walking to school, little young boys walking to school, and 2 miles, it's hard for me to walk 2 miles on a treadmill, let alone walking to school. Speaking to Jacoby Edwards, he's one of the teachers in Duval County, and he says kids are not going to come to school. And then we're going to talk about suffering grades and, kids failing. It's hot outside, walking 2 miles, you're coming to school and you're sweating and I feel like I need to take a shower after going outside for just 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
let alone, I think this is terrible. I think this is something that they're quickly going to regret.
Yeah, Rich, I was thinking, I mean, anybody that works as you do in a business where right around 5 o'clock at night, you're getting ready for live shots, when kids are getting out of school is one of the peak points for some really torrential downpours during the summer.
Right.
It seems like that would be a real tough thing to walk 2 miles in that.
It's oftentimes severe weather. It's the heat of the day as well. And this is one of the mounting tasks that the new superintendent, Christopher Bernier, is going to have to handle in Duval County. Aside from budget cuts throughout the entire district and a loss of teacher jobs, yes, dealing with Student Transportation of America and Durham buses, these are major issues that he's going to have to deal with that, quite frankly, that's what the money's for. That's why he's in the job. He's tasked with fixing these problems.
And this is very much like the school consolidation. This is a reality of budget cuts. They're not doing this because they necessarily want kids to have to walk further.
Yeah, it's a way to save money, but there are some trade-offs there, right? I mean, if I thought the story that Jasmine's talking about, where the teacher was talking about how if you're a young student and it's raining cats and dogs, and you've got to walk 2 miles in the rain, maybe you decide not to go to school that day, and that's not the outcome that anybody wants. I was shocked actually that the current limit is 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
So they're adding out to 2 miles. To me, 1.5 miles is a long way. It's a shame that budget cuts are causing this kind of degradation in service to families and children.
And to Jasmine's source's point, the increased truancy rate is going to lead to more costs for Duval County. I mean, it's not. I don't think they're really thinking ahead about the impacts that this could have.
And just to even hear some people say it's only 1,100 students, if that's your kid, imagine hearing someone saying it's only 1,100 and you're included in that 1,100.
Yeah. I want to move on and talk about a new plan that was unveiled this week to deal with homelessness in the city. This is a plan to comply with a new state law that bans camping, so that can be enforced. It is not illegal anymore to remove people who don't have another place to go. So this is a broad 12-step plan, David. It's 5 years in the implementing of it. Tell us some of the parameters.
Yeah, basically the state says you've got to crack down on public camping. And we see some of that around downtown, those of us who go downtown where people have tents or they're just sleeping on sidewalks. That'd be one example of it, but it's in the suburbs as well. I mean, I've been out to a big box store. I live in East Arlington, and just off the parking lot, there's 4 or 5 tents in the woods. So there's people who have no place to live. They're pitching camps or just sleeping out there in the elements. So the idea is this is not acceptable. And so now they're going to create some new programs to try and expand the number of beds available in shelters. They're going to try and have a better information keeping system, which I thought was kind of interesting, that if the police get a call and somebody's out there at midnight camping in a public place, then they're kind of in a, what do? We don't know where the shelters have space. Don't want to take them to jail. That's the worst case scenario in these cases. So they're going to try and create a better system where they know at any given time there's space at this shelter. You can take that person there. So that's going to help, I think, in terms of right sizing things. But still, it's going to be, I think, some, how is this all going to work? If it doesn't work well, then you're going to have homeless people in jail. And that's the worst possible outcome for this. And there's also going to be some wraparound services to help people.
One thing that I thought was interesting was the expansion of intake hours. And I didn't realize this, but basically until this takes effect, you're only during business hours is when you can go get into a shelter. Homeless experts and advocates here say that that's a key. Nighttime is a really key time, where people are being found unhoused, particularly by police, but there's no option.
Mm-hmm.
And so this would basically make that at least a more 24/7 option.
I think that's excellent, but I also noticed when I was going through the 12 points that I didn't see anything that referred to mental health and addiction. And
Right.
one of the my sources in the homeless community say one of the major problems with bringing people to shelters is that a lot of times, or even housing, is that you have to be drug free. And a lot of these people are not drug free, they're not addiction free, and they won't be until they have safe housing. So it really becomes a dilemma. And I think that's going to be an ongoing battle.
Trisha Booker, David Bauerlein, Rich Donnelly, and Jasmine.
Injury and wrongful death law firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
On the next Florida Roundup, the Supreme Court punted on a Florida law limiting how much social media platforms can regulate users and messages. Instead, a lower court will first have to decide if the law violates the First Amendment. In this election year, how much do you depend on social media? And should social media like X, YouTube, and Facebook be able to censor your speech? Email us, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Join us Friday, noon until 1.
Celebrated author Amy Tan doesn't have to go far to be marveled by nature. All she has to do is peer into her own backyard.
When I see something I've never seen before, I have this thrill inside of me that, oh my God, I've just been led into secret growth. I don't know whether you just heard that. That was a Buick's run, and now he's landed, and now he's gone into the feeder.
Amy Tan joins us on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Can Kamala Harris win? America's 46th president says, yes, she can.
She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable.
The 45th? No, she can't.
She'll destroy our country in a year.
By any measure, it's been a remarkable 7 days. We'll catch up on all of it on the Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
First Coast Deadheads have been gathering to pay tribute to the legendary band, the Grateful Dead. It's called the China Cat Sunflower Festival. It draws hundreds of people each year, and here to talk about it is the organizing force behind this annual festival, Brenda Starr Walker. Welcome, Brenda.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. So this is now, I think we're in the third generation of Deadheads. Is that true? People are taking their grandkids to
my grandkids will be there.
and no longer the Grateful Dead, so we're tribute shows or shows that are honoring the dead like this one. Is that right? So you're going to be taking your own grandkid?
I am. I have grown grandchildren who, of course, grew up with this, and now I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they're all about it.
Wow, that's amazing. So what is the enduring appeal of the Grateful Dead that people of all those generations are drawn to them?
Well, you know, their motto is, what I want to know is, are you kind? And it is a tribe of people that are just kind folks. And when I saw my first show, I was 42 years old.
Oh, wow.
Walked into Atlanta. Everybody was dancing and singing every word to every tune. And I was like, these are my people. Where have I been? And I hopped on the bus real quick and saw 28 shows before Jerry died.
I remember the first show that I went to in D.C., and we were taking the Metro, and as the Metro moved closer to town, it just became this sea of tie-dye. Everybody's loading in, and it's a totally different look than what you typically see on that commuter train. So people are passionate about the Dead. What is it about them that evokes such strong reactions?
That's a good question. There's a genuineness to this thing, again, with the theme of kindness, and you know, it's a real hippie kind of a thing.
For sure.
But then again, there were people from my first show, a lawyer gave me the ticket, you know, so, and then recorded the entire show. And the next day I had 3 cassette tapes of my very first show.
Oh, wow.
I still have it. Now it's on CDs.
So they're famous for their bootlegs. That's one of the ways that they communicate, that people share their music, and very often fans will reference a particular performance at a particular venue on a particular day as kind of the monumental performance. So this is called China Cat Sunflower Festival. That's the name of a Grateful Dead song. Why did you pick that as the name for this event?
After Jerry died, I was driving around one night crying and thinking, oh God, what now? You know, it changed everything for a lot of people because it was like our vacations. That's what we did. And China Cat, I heard at my first show. It's a beautiful song. The lyrics are amazing. And
The lyrics are very psychedelic, present a psychedelic way of
Yeah.
thinking, if not actually like a psychedelic experience.
Let me
with
just say a few of them. Look for a while at the China Cat sunflower, proud, walking jingle in the midnight sun. A copper dome Bodhi dripped a silver kimono like a crazy quilt star gown through a dream night wind. That's just the first verse.
It is an extraordinary, and this is a band and an audience that I think a lot of people associate with psychedelics, but that isn't
Yeah.
the entire experience. Obviously, there are all kinds of, as we say, young and old going to these shows
Yeah.
for reasons other than partaking in psychedelic drugs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So since Jerry Garcia's death, fans, as you say, were bereft, some of them a little bit unmoored, but they've moved on to follow other bands like Widespread Panic and
Right.
Billy Strings and
Right.
Fish. So that vibe does continue to carry through, and those shows are very much like Dead shows.
Very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We've got a call from Charles. He has a question for you. Go ahead, Charles.
Good morning, Brenda, and everybody else.
hear it.
Brenda, I know it's like asking you to name your favorite child, but my favorite album is Blues for Allah, and besides being possibly named after a 40s comic book strip character, Brenda Starr, do you have a favorite album?
Good question.
A favorite album. I don't listen to albums. I listen to bootlegs. And I have my own bootlegs.
Do you have
that
a
I
favorite
listen to.
bootleg?
Well, my first show.
Okay. Remains the same. So tell us what to expect at this year's. It's the 29th year of this event. What are we going to see?
It's going to be a little different this year. Usually we begin at 4:20, kind of wink, wink, with a drum circle. And I have a direct connection to Jerry. I do, really. I mean, every year, something will happen at the last minute. I'm thinking, oh my God, Jerry takes care of it. And this year he suggested that we start the festival with something I've been doing for as long as I've been doing these festivals, 29 years, which is called Practice World Peace. It's a very simple yoga class that I offer in Memorial Park. Been doing it for 29 years. And Jerry was like, why don't you start the festival with that this year? And then do the drum circle, and then the music. So that's what we're going to do.
It's a free event. There's going to be performances by the Ouija Brothers, Glass Camels.
Yes.
And it'll be fun as always.
Yes.
Brenda Starwalker, thanks.
This Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Florida Blue, committed to health solutions for Floridians in need. From providing meals to making sure people can get to the care they need.